It was late at night when the message came through. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about the trip. We've decided to postpone it until next year." I stared at the message, my heart sinking. Postponed? We'd been planning this vacation for months, our first family getaway in years. I had rearranged my work schedule, budgeted every cent, and counted down the days like a child waiting for Christmas. Without wasting a second, I called my mom. She sighed when she picked up. "Harper, I know you're disappointed, but things are really tight right now. We just can't afford it." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. I understood the pressure of money issues. I really did. I'd been working extra shifts at the cafe, even offered to cover my own airfare, all to make this trip possible. But something in her voice, the finality of it, the way it felt as though the decision had already been made and my feelings didn't matter, stung deeply. It felt like a slap in the face. Taking a steadying breath, I spoke up, trying to hold on to a shred of hope. "If it's about money, maybe we could find a cheaper hotel or shorten the trip." There was a brief pause, just a second, but I heard it. "Harper," she said softly, "it's just not the right time. We'll make it happen next year, I promise." A promise. One that, deep down, I knew I shouldn't believe. 2 days later, during my lunch break, I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw it. My stomach dropped. There was a picture of my mom and dad on a beach, looking happy and carefree. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. There they were, sun-kissed, drinks in hand, with the ocean stretching behind them, glistening in the afternoon sun. I took a shaky breath and scrolled down, my eyes burning as I saw more photos. My brother Mason, smiling with his girlfriend on a boat. My parents, grinning at a seafood restaurant, lobster plates in front of them. Then, the caption that made my blood run cold. "Family time is priceless." Family time, except, apparently, I wasn't part of it. According to them, the trip had been postponed. I locked my phone, sitting frozen at the counter. My mind raced. Maybe there was an explanation. Perhaps it had been a last-minute work thing, or maybe someone had gifted them the trip. But deep down, I knew the truth. They hadn't postponed anything. They'd simply made the choice that I wasn't invited. That night, I didn't call my mom. I didn't comment on the post. Instead, I watched in silence as more photos flooded my feed in the days that followed. They went snorkeling. They had bonfires on the beach. They created memories, without me. And as I stared at each new picture, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just about the trip. It was about all the times I'd been an afterthought, the birthdays they forgot, the holidays where my gifts felt like an afterthought, while Mason always got exactly what he wanted. All the sacrifices I made for them, while they never seemed to do the same for me. I clenched my jaw and took a deep breath. They thought I'd be too hurt to say anything. They thought I'd just let it slide. But this time, I was done being the forgotten one. They didn't know I'd seen the photos. Not yet. A week later, when they returned home, I was waiting for them. And I had a plan. I heard the taxi pull up outside, the sound of it rolling over the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as my mom, dad, and Mason stepped out, dragging their suitcases behind them. They looked tired but happy, sun-kissed from their so-called postponed trip. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to remain calm. They didn't know I'd seen the pictures. Not yet. The front door swung open, and my mom was the first to spot me. "Harper!" she exclaimed, her voice overly bright. "Oh, sweetheart, I missed you. How have you been?" I folded my arms across my chest. "Busy," I said flatly. My dad walked in behind her, setting his bags down. "That's good. How's work?" I let out a bitter laugh. Work? That was all I had done. Work and pretend I didn't see their photos. Pretend I wasn't invisible to them. Mason yawned, stretching his arms. "Man, I'm exhausted. Traveling really takes it out of you." He turned to me with a smirk. "Hope you held down the fort while we were gone." My eyes snapped to him. While we were gone? Like it was normal. Like nothing was wrong. Like I hadn't spent the past week replaying their betrayal over and over again. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. No more pretending. I turned to my mom, my voice unnervingly calm. "So how was the trip?" She blinked, hesitation flashing in her eyes. "Oh, we just needed a little getaway, nothing too special." Liar. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and turned the screen toward them. The photo album was open. The beach selfie, the boat ride, the fancy dinner, and the caption that made my stomach turn all over again. Family time is priceless. I tilted my head, letting the silence stretch between us. Looked special to me. And then it hit. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. My mom let out a nervous laugh. "Harper, I cut her off, my voice sharp and cold. "Don't, just don't." My dad cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, sweetheart, it wasn't—" "Stop," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Just tell me the truth. You never postponed the trip. You just didn't want me there." I saw the guilt flash across my mom's face, but she quickly masked it with a weak excuse. "It wasn't like that, honey. We just thought—" "What?" I snapped. "That I wouldn't notice? That I wouldn't see the pictures? That I'd be stupid enough to believe your lie?" Mason groaned, rolling his eyes. "Oh my God, Harper, are you seriously making this a big deal? It was just a trip." "Just a trip?" The words hit me like a slap. I had planned it. I had saved for it. I was supposed to be a part of it. But now, it all felt like a distant dream. I shook my head, frustration rising. "You could have told me the truth," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Instead, you lied to me. You made me feel like I wasn't worth bringing along." Mason scoffed, rolling his eyes. "You're being dramatic," he said dismissively. I let out a bitter laugh. "No, Mason. For once, I'm being honest." My mom stepped forward, reaching out to me. "Harper, please," she pleaded softly. I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. "No, not this time," I said firmly. They needed to hear this. "This isn't just about the trip. It's about every single time I've been made to feel like I don't matter. Every holiday when Mason got exactly what he wanted and I got whatever was convenient. Every time I put you guys first and you didn't even notice." I swallowed hard, my voice trembling as I continued. "I thought if I worked hard enough, if I gave enough, I'd finally be enough for you. But I never was I?" There was a long silence. No one said anything. Finally, my mom sighed. "Harper, it's not like we love Mason more than you." I let out a small, bitter smile. "Maybe you don't, but it sure feels that way." Another heavy silence fell over the room, and that was all the answer I needed. I nodded, exhaling sharply. "Got it," I muttered. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and turned toward the door. "Harper, where are you going?" My dad's voice called from behind me, but I didn't look back. "Somewhere I'm actually wanted," I said quietly. Then I left. For the first time in my life, I put myself first. For days, my phone was flooded with messages from them, but I wasn't going to fix things this time. They could figure it out without me. I didn't answer their calls. I didn't respond to their texts. For once, I wasn't rushing to smooth things over. It felt strange at first, ignoring them. The guilt crept in like an old habit, whispering in the back of my mind. "Maybe you're overreacting. Maybe you should just let it go." But then I'd remember the message about the trip being postponed, the photos of them having fun without me, the lie they told without a second thought. And suddenly, the silence felt like freedom. By the 5th day, their messages started to change. At first, they had been firm, dismissive, trying to regain control. "Mom, Harper, we need to talk about this. You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Dad, ignoring us isn't going to change anything. Call your mother." Mason, "Jesus, Harper, get over it. You're acting like a child." I rolled my eyes. Classic. They weren't sorry. They just wanted me to stop making them uncomfortable. But when I didn't respond, the tone shifted. "Mom, sweetheart, please, we miss you. We never meant to hurt you." Dad, "We should have handled things differently. Let's talk." And then there was the message that almost got me. "Mom, Harper, I feel awful. I can't sleep knowing you're upset with us." For a brief moment, I almost responded. Almost. But then I asked myself, if I had never seen the photos, would they have ever told me the truth? Would they have ever felt guilty at all? The answer was painfully clear. So, I locked my phone and let the silence stretch on. It wasn't easy. I'd spent years being the one to reach out first, the one to smooth things over, the one who made excuses for them. So sitting with the silence, holding my boundary, felt unnatural at first. But as the days passed, I realized something. They weren't reaching out because they missed me. They were reaching out because they missed the role I played in their lives. The fixer, the peacekeeper, the afterthought who never made waves. And now that I refused to be that person, they didn't know what to do. A week after their return, I did something I had never done before. I booked a weekend trip for myself. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet cabin in the mountains, far away from everything. I packed my bag, grabbed my keys, and left without telling anyone where I was going. For once, I wasn't asking for permission. I wasn't waiting to be included. I was just living for myself. And it felt amazing. By the time I returned, my phone was full of missed calls and texts, but I didn't rush to respond. I wasn't ready yet, because for the first time in my life, I was finally putting myself first, and I wanted to enjoy that feeling a little longer. They weren't used to me ignoring them, so when my silence lasted longer than they expected, they showed up at my door. And I was ready. I knew it was coming the moment I ignored their calls, their messages, their guilt trips. I knew my parents wouldn't just let it go. So when I heard the knock on my door that Saturday afternoon, I wasn't surprised. I took a deep breath, setting my coffee down. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. I was ready. I opened the door to find my mom and dad standing on my porch. They looked different. Not angry, not smug, not demanding. They looked nervous. "Harper," my mom said softly, tucking her purse under her arm. "Can we come in?" I leaned against the doorframe, eyeing them carefully. "Depends," I said evenly. "Are you here to actually listen, or just to tell me why I'm wrong for being upset?" My dad sighed. "We're here to talk, really talk." I studied their faces. They weren't ordering me to let them in. They weren't dismissing my feelings like they had in their messages. They were asking, and that was new. I stepped aside. "Fine," I said. "Come in." I led them into the living room. The air felt thick with unspoken words. My mom sat on the couch, her hands folded neatly in her lap. My dad stayed standing, unsure if he even belonged there. I sat across from them, arms crossed, waiting. My mom was the first to speak, though she seemed uncertain. "I don't know where to start," she admitted quietly. "The truth is a good place," I replied flatly. She flinched, and my dad exhaled sharply through his nose. "We messed up," he said, his voice rough. I blinked, taken aback. I hadn't expected him to admit it so simply. My mom lowered her eyes to her hands. "Harper," she began, her voice tentative. "When we said the trip was postponed, it was a lie. No excuses, no dancing around it, just the truth." I swallowed, the tightness in my throat making it hard to speak. "Why?" I asked, the word coming out thick with emotion. She hesitated before answering, her voice small. "We thought it would be easier." "Easier?" I repeated, my jaw clenching. "Easier for who?" There was silence, and then I pressed harder. "For you? For Mason?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Because it sure as hell wasn't easier for me." My dad ran a hand over his face, looking worn. "We didn't think it would hurt you this much." I scoffed. "You didn't think at all." My mom's voice cracked slightly as she continued. "We thought you'd understand." Understand? The same word they had used in their messages. The word that meant nothing now. I leaned forward, my voice firm. "Tell me the truth. If I hadn't seen those pictures, would you have ever told me?" Neither of them answered, and that silence was all the answer I needed. I swallowed again, the lump in my throat making it hard to breathe. I forced my voice to stay steady. "Do you have any idea what that felt like? To see you all having fun without me? To know that I was never even considered?" My mom's eyes shimmered with guilt. "Harper, we love you." I shook my head, tears threatening to surface. "You don't treat people you love like that." My dad sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We failed you, sweetheart. we should have been honest with you. I stared at him, then at my mom. Why are you really here? I asked, my voice cutting through the air. To apologize? Or to make yourselves feel better? They hesitated for a long moment. Then my mom answered, both. At least that was honest. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity before my mom finally spoke. I don't know how to fix this. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of all the years I'd been in second place. And then I realized something. I didn't need them to fix it. I just needed them to understand that things would never be the same. I don't know either, I admitted, my voice quiet but steady. But I do know this. I'm not going to be the one to fix it for you. My dad nodded slowly, his expression understanding. My mom wiped at her eyes, trying to hold it together. What do we do now? She asked. I met her gaze, my words firm. That's up to you. They thought an apology would be enough, but apologies don't erase years of being treated like an afterthought. This time, they had to prove they were willing to change. Apologies were easy. Change? That was the hard part. After my parents left that day, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel like anything had really been fixed. They had admitted their mistake. They had apologized. But I had heard apologies before. Their actions had always spoken louder than their words. And this time, I wasn't interested in just words. I wanted proof. For the first time in my life, I didn't go out of my way to reach out first. I didn't text them good morning. I didn't send them updates about my life. I didn't check in to see if they needed anything. For the first time, I made them do the work. At first, nothing happened. Days passed, then a week, then 2. And I thought, there it is. That's the proof I needed. If I wasn't the one putting in the effort, there was no effort at all. I should have known, I should have expected it, but somehow it still hurt. It wasn't until the 3rd week that things began to shift. It was a random Tuesday when my mom called. I let it go to voicemail, then came the text. Mom, hey sweetheart, just thinking about you. Hope you're doing okay. A part of me wanted to ignore it, to keep my distance. But another part, the part that had been waiting for any sign that they actually cared, hesitated. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I waited. The next day, my dad texted me too. Dad, miss you kid, let's get dinner sometime. I stared at the message, emotions colliding inside me. Not because I was ready to let them back in, but because for the first time, they were trying. I agreed to dinner, not because everything was forgiven, not because I was ready to pretend nothing had happened, but because I needed to see if they were serious. We met at a quiet restaurant, just the 3 of us. Mason wasn't there, and that alone told me they had been paying attention. We sat down, and for the first time in years, my parents asked about me. Not about Mason, not about work, not about whether I could help them with something, just me. I wasn't sure if it was genuine, or if they were just trying to fix what was broken, but for the first time they were actually listening. And that was new. Halfway through dinner, my mom cleared her throat. We've been thinking a lot about what you said, she said carefully, her voice sincere. About how we've treated you. I took a sip of my water, staying silent. She continued, and we've realized that we always assumed you didn't need us the way Mason did. That because you were strong and independent, we didn't have to put in as much effort. I met her gaze, and she swallowed. And now we know that was wrong. I glanced at my dad. He nodded. We see it now, Harper. We do. For a moment, I didn't know what to say, because those were the words I'd been waiting to hear for so long. But hearing them now, I wasn't sure if they would really make a difference. I had waited my entire life for this, and yet part of me still couldn't fully believe them. Not yet. By the time dinner ended, something between us had shifted. It wasn't some grand, dramatic, everything is fixed moment, but more like a subtle, maybe this time they actually mean it kind of shift. They still had a long road ahead, but for once, they were the ones who took the first steps. And right then, that was enough. But words were still just that, words. If they really wanted to make things right, they were going to have to show me. One dinner, one conversation, couldn't erase years of feeling like an afterthought. I wasn't searching for a quick fix, nor was I asking for another empty apology. If they truly wanted to change, they would need to prove it. The first real test came a week later, on my birthday. And if there was one thing history had taught me, It was that birthdays in our family had always been anything but fair. Mason's birthdays? Always a huge deal. Big parties, presents, fancy dinner reservations. Mine? Maybe a card. Maybe a phone call, if they remembered. So I promised myself I wouldn't expect anything this year. I told myself I wouldn't care. But when I woke up that morning, there was still a small, fragile part of me. The part that clung to the hope that maybe they had changed, that hoped they wouldn't forget this time. Then, exactly at 10 a.m., there was a knock on the door. I frowned, setting my coffee cup down. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I saw my mom and dad standing there, holding a cake. My breath caught in my chest. They had never done this before. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," my mom said softly, offering me a hesitant smile. I blinked in surprise. "You remembered?" My dad chuckled softly. "Of course we did." And for once, I believed them. They didn't just drop off the cake and leave. They actually stayed, spending the day with me. It wasn't extravagant, just a quiet afternoon at my place, chatting, catching up, eating cake that was a little too sweet, but still perfect because it was mine. There were no rushed goodbyes, no sense that I was just another obligation. For the first time in a long time, it felt like they genuinely wanted to be there. I didn't realize how much I needed that until it actually happened. A few weeks later, they proved it again. I had a major presentation at work, something I'd been nervous about for weeks. I had mentioned it briefly over dinner one night, not thinking much of it. But when the day came, I received a text from my mom. "Mom, thinking of you today. You're going to do great." Then, from my dad. "Dad, let us know how it goes, kiddo. Proud of you, no matter what." I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity. They had never done this before. I wasn't used to them remembering the small things, and yet here they were, trying. It wasn't perfect. Old habits still crept in. Mom still defaulted to making excuses for Mason. Dad still struggled to express his feelings beyond a few words. But the difference was that they noticed when they messed up. They caught themselves, and they tried to do better. And that was what mattered. One night, several months later, my mom called me. Not for anything urgent, just to chat. At one point in the conversation, she sighed. "I know it's going to take time," she said gently, "for you to trust us again." I swallowed, my voice thick. "Yeah." There was a pause before she added, "We're not giving up, Harper. You're too important to us." For the first time, I felt my throat tighten, and for the first time, I believed her. I finally felt like I mattered. Change didn't happen overnight. There were still moments when I found myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, when I expected my parents to revert to their old habits, to forget, or to stop trying. But as the weeks turned into months, they kept showing up. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always effortless. But for the first time in my life, I finally felt like I mattered. One evening, I was sitting on my back porch, sipping tea, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mom. Not an apology, not a guilt trip, just a simple text. "Mom, thinking of you. How's your week going?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, feeling something warm settle in my chest. That message wouldn't have existed a year ago. A few weeks later, I got another surprise. I had been saving for a solo vacation, just for me. I hadn't told my family much about it, mostly because I didn't want to deal with their opinions. But then, one night at dinner, my dad asked, "So, when's your trip?" I blinked, taken off guard. "You remember?" He smirked. "Of course. It's Italy, right?" My mom nodded. "We were actually talking about it the other day. Do you need help with anything? Packing? Planning?" I studied them carefully, waiting for some hidden agenda, but there was none. They weren't offering because they wanted something in return. They were offering because they genuinely wanted to be part of my life. And that was new. The night before my flight, I received a text from Mason. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Mason, Mom won't say it, but she's freaking out about you traveling alone. You know how she is." I rolled my eyes. Typical. Then another message followed. "Mason, you're doing it, huh? Living your life on your own terms." I paused before typing my response. "Yeah, I am." There was a long silence before Mason's final message came through. "Mason, that's kind of badass, sis." As I stepped off the plane in Rome, a heavy realization hit me. I had spent years of my life waiting for my parents to recognize me, waiting for them to make me feel included, waiting for the day I wouldn't feel like an afterthought. But in that moment, I understood. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was choosing myself. I had built a life where their approval wasn't necessary, and in doing so, they had finally learned how to show up for me when I stopped waiting for them to do it. A few days later, while I sat at a cafe, my phone buzzed in my hand. A group message appeared. "Mom, we just saw your latest photos. Rome looks incredible. Call us soon. We miss you." I couldn't help but smile, not because I needed them to validate me, but because, for the first time, they weren't just speaking empty words. They meant it. And for the first time in my life, that felt more than enough. You shouldn't have to beg for love. You shouldn't have to fight to be part of something. And if the people around you can't see your worth, you have to choose yourself. Because sometimes, when you stop waiting to be seen, that's when they finally begin to notice.